G'day ladies and gentlemen, ScottyD here from the Australia's Tabletop Wargaming Network, and welcome in to another installment in our competitive focus series. Alrighty ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Australia's Tabletop Wargaming Network. It's great to have another video for you guys here on our YouTube channel for our competitive focus series, which is focused around the competitive side of Warhammer 40,000, whether that's playing in tournaments, whether that's looking at competitive stuff that I'm looking to do with, whether that's army lists, faction breakdowns, things like that as well. But for today's video, we are actually going to be jumping into player conduct and discussing the importance of it and why players should be expected to behave to a certain standard and a certain level within tournaments especially. So we're going to be deep diving into that in a little bit for today's video. But before we jump in, I want to thank everyone who has been supporting us here over on the YouTube channel. We are so close to 1,000 subscribers here on the network, less than 25 subs away over here on YouTube, and we are able to reach that soon because of your guys' support, with you guys subscribing and watching our content and liking our videos and sharing it with your friends as well. It is all greatly appreciated. So we're going to start off by jumping in and kind of describing what player conduct is, and the way that I see it as both a TO and as a player myself. So player conduct is how a player actually behaves, not just on the table in the middle of a game. It's also how they interact with people whilst at an event. It's also how you handle rules disputes and your general behavior and attitude, and the way that you tackle some disagreements with other players and such when you come to those. And so something that a lot of tournaments have nowadays, and a lot of teams as well will also have, whether that is a WTC style team or whether that is a club style team for BCP rankings, is a code of conduct. Now personally for me as a TO, I always like to look at some of the heavy hitters in the tournament organization space in terms of where to actually pull some of my code of conduct references from and how I actually handle things. And one of the big hitters in the market, particularly in the United States, is Frontline Gaming. Now they previously did do the ITC code of conduct back in 2021. However, this has been updated within the past month to 2 months, quite possibly, as being the Frontline Gaming code of conduct. And that is what we're going to have a bit of a look at today, because I use that a lot for generally when I'm looking at issues that I'm dealing with, you know, whether that's handing out a card to a player or a points penalty, or whether something is actually a player foul or it is just a genuine mistake, and just figuring things out from there and using that as kind of a metric to understand what is actually going on, how some of the biggest tournament organizers in the United States actually look at how they handle things such as poor player decorum, player misconduct, yellow cards, red cards, and defining things such as what is the spirit of the game, what is active and passive judging, like all these different things that as TOs you mightn't be aware of, but at the same time as a player you need to be aware of as well, in terms of how a TO is going to be ruling things, what they actually may consider to be misconduct, or you know, something that is unbecoming of a competitive player in the Warhammer 40K tournament scene, or also, you know, what instances of penalties and actions do TOs actually have available to them to be able to utilize for their events. But as a player, the biggest thing that I see when it comes to player conduct is I'm a massive proponent of sportsmanship and fair play first and foremost. You want to ensure that everyone has an enjoyable experience playing against you, and you don't want to put the game into disrepute by you not having a behavior that is beyond reproach by the TOs. You are able to calmly and concisely articulate your rules disputes with your opponent and work them out amicably, so that, you know, both players are able to feel like they're a part of that discussion, instead of one side feeling like, you know, this is the way it's done and such, and being heavy handed in that approach, rather than going, hey, let's work this out together, and having a you know, a collaborative approach. Because my personal view is you are playing with your opponent, your armies are the ones that are opposing each other, and you're just resolving how all that interaction occurs. And at the end of the day, we're all there to have fun and enjoy the game. but there are instances that do come up in the community at large. This isn't an isolated incident to just, you know, within the Australian scene or the United States scene or the European scene or the scene in the UK. It happens everywhere. And so it's really important for us as players to be aware of our own behaviors, our own, you know, interactions with our opponents, how we handle ourselves during rules disputes, and, you know, taking accountability for mistakes that you make in your games as well, and being able to be willing to say, look, I'm sorry, I got this rule wrong. I'm sorry that, you know, I misplayed that thing. But also, where is that line drawn from a TO perspective in terms of players that are consistently doing that kind of thing and consistently making those kind of mistakes? And, you know, what can TOs do about that? So that's what we're going to be really jumping into for this video. And so now we're going to jump into looking at the Frontline Gaming Code of Conduct, and we're going to go through different parts of it, which we're going to have on the screen for you guys. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, so this is the Frontline Gaming Code of Conduct that they use for all of their events. Now, of course, we had Champions Cup happen 2 weeks ago, and so this Code of Conduct would have been in effect at Champions Cup. Now, you can see there's a whole list on that table of contents that they've got, such as purpose, the Frontline Gaming judging philosophy, spirit of the game, game state, time, list submission, stratagems and abilities, player decorum, the tools that you have available, what to do when you're calling a judge, penalties, teams and clubs, chess clock rules, index of terms, and those who did contribute. There was a lot of big names in the Frontline Gaming Tournament Organisers group that did a lot of work in putting this together back when it was the ITC Code of Conduct, and it is still a really great metric for any tournament organizer to actually base their own Code of Conduct off if you are wanting to utilize it, or just straight up reference the Frontline Gaming Code of Conduct as being in use at your event. So what I want to start off with is to really talk a bit about the purpose. Now, it says here that Frontline Gaming Code of Conduct provides judges and players with the knowledge of appropriate player behavior and procedures for handling interactions and adjudicating player disputes that occur during the course of running a Frontline Gaming tournament. This document exists for 2 primary purposes. The first is to maintain and ensure the integrity of events. The second is protect participants from abuse. Both of those are the primary purposes that any code of conduct should have, whether that is a team's code of conduct, a tournament code of conduct, or, you know, something else that is established by, say, a tournament ranking circuit might have a code of conduct as well, like the ITC used to have. So that is something that's really important, because whilst yes, it is designed for frontline gaming events, basically you could use this metric as being like, well, I don't want players to attend my events and cop abuse from others, or be put in situations that are abusive in terms of rules interactions or people angle shooting and things like that. And I also want to uphold the integrity of my event as well. So that's something to be considerate of when we are looking through the purposes of this code of conduct and any other code of conducts as well. Now, when we come to the judging philosophy, there's a few different things that I actually cover here. The first up is natural justice. Now, this is where, you know, it's important, as I say, not to penalize players unfairly by applying the letter of the rule when that would actually go against the spirit of the game or the intention of the rule that is in place. However, if someone is looking to abuse the code of conduct to their advantage, it's considered angle shooting or committing a foul, which will have a card and a penalty appropriately given, which is completely fair. Because yes, can someone make mistakes in a game? Fully happy to see people make mistakes. As I always like to say, when it comes to any rules disputes or any discussions I have with fellow TOs, there is never going to be and never has been a perfect game of Warhammer 40,000 ever played. That is always completely fair. So someone making a mistake at a tournament, getting a statistic wrong, it's not a massive issue. Now, as a tournament organizer, as a judge, we shouldn't be impeding the flow of the game. And by doing that, it means we're interrupting them as little as possible. So if there is something that we have to interject with, like they've asked for a rules call, or if we are doing active judging, which is described a little bit here below, where we are actually actively officiating the rules of the game, as well as ensuring that measurements are done correctly, dice rolls and stuff, when a player is not performing these actions correctly, then that is the times where we should be intervening, not kind of, you know, constantly going and intervening in the game. However, there is the opposite side, which is passive judging, which is, you know, handling nuanced rules disputes between players when a solution between the two players isn't easily achieved. So it means that, you know, you've got to balance the active judging and the passive judging in terms of how you actually handle yourself as a judge or as a TO. I tend to lean a bit more in favor of an active judging, more of an active judging attitude rather than just a passive judging and just waiting for problems to come at me. I much rather walking around consistently, checking in with various tables, making sure everyone's having a good time. And, you know, if they're able to see me walking around, then they're probably going to be able to a lot easier to grab me rather than them going and, you know, if I'm sat behind the TO desk whilst I'm running the event and that's all I'm doing, then it's a lot harder for maybe them to come up. There's that barrier that they don't want to maybe disturb me, or, you know, when it is my job as a TO to professionally adjudicate the tournament in a professional manner. Now, time management at events is also, you know, the TO or judge's responsibility, making sure it's running on time and to the schedule that is set, and appropriately updating players if delays have occurred because maybe there's a best coast pairings issue, things like that. So communicating those is super important. Player conduct, judges and TOs are the people who police players' sportsmanship and ensure that they adhere to the social contract or the code of conduct that is in place as well. And for terminology explanation, the social contract is the agreement between players to follow basic decency and adhere to agreements made between them that are made as a part of the game as well. Then TOs and judges have what's called a presumptive authority, where judges have the ability to make a binding rules decision at that point in time, even if they are found to later have made the wrong call. It's better to make a call in that moment so that players are able to continue on with their game than spend 10-15 minutes trying to dig into the rules commentary, the rule book, find the correct answer, then spend 5 minutes going, I can't find it, this is the way I interpret it. You guys keep on playing with that interpretation in mind. If I have to course correct later, I'll update both of you or update the player who had that question if you're able to dig into that further. Then enforcement, TOs are responsible for enforcing things such as penalties, yellow cards, red cards, bans, ejections, team warnings, things like that as well. And judges' conduct as well is something that is mentioned here, which is great to see in my personal opinion, that, you know, we can see in this document that judges are expected to perform their duties in a professional manner. Now, players have an option to reach out to the FLG admin team if a judge at one of their events isn't doing so and is not in compliance with these guidelines, but judges do have a responsibility to the players to act in a fair manner. When we come to the spirit of the game, basically this means that it's primarily for fun. Like, we want to go to these events and enjoy ourselves and have great games, and it's about having sporting competition between two individuals or two different teams if it is a teams event, and actions that are considered an unsportsmanlike nature are not considered to be within the spirit of the game. Now, game state, there is a lot of detail here around how you interact with your opponent's models and announcing intent and things like that. We're not going to dig too much into that, but as a player, this is something to be abundantly aware of, and I'd encourage you, we're going to pop a link down in the description below for this code of conduct. It's something that I think all players should be aware of how they should actually sportsmanly and above reproach actually behave at the table and interact with your opponents. So you can see it is a massive long list there. When it comes to time, the round timers are again adjudicated by the TOs or judges and maintained. And only the judges are the ones that can change it. Now, the round timing is binding, so players can't start their games before the round has officially been called. Some events will allow you to do that if you're already there. At singles events, a lot easier to do than teams, as well as tournament organizers are free to adjudicate this as they need to. So if additional time is required, then they can apply for that. When a judge calls hard dice down, that's it, game's over, that's done. No further actions can be taken. Players that do willfully ignore it can be issued yellow or red cards with appropriate penalties at the judge's discretion. During a timed game, so for example, when a game is on a clock, only a judge can stop the timekeeping device used, and during a clocked game, only a judge can alter the time being used on the chess clock itself, and players are expected to understand and acknowledge the suggested time frames at an event that they are attending. So understanding, for example, Gong Hammer, 2 hours and 45-minute rounds. The first 15 minutes is expected to be your discussion between players in terms of setting up, running through army lists and everything. If you get through that in 10 minutes, it gives you 5 minutes to finish your scores at the end of the game, and you've got 2.5 hours there to play your games. That's kind of the expectation for Gong Hammer, at least as an example. Now, when it does come to the use of chess clocks, only one player does need to ask for it to be used, for it to be enforced by the judging team, as FLG have here, and that's my own personal opinion. I think if someone is asking to play on a clock and there is a reason that they want to, or they're just used to playing it, that's perfectly fine. But if a player is vehemently against playing on clock, then it actually sends up, at least personally as a tier, it sends up some red flags as to why you're not comfortable playing on clock. Is it one, because you're unfamiliar with it, or two, you're worried that you're going to clock out because of the army that you've brought to an event, and you haven't really considered the implications of how much time you're using during a game. So those are the kind of things that are important. Then when you come to army list submission, again, this is all of the list submission requirements that FLG have for their events. Of course, every event is going to be different with list submission. Some will have a penalty where if you don't submit it on time a week ahead, you'll get a yellow card with a 20-point deduction from round 1, for example, like they've got here. But every tournament's going to apply different penalties and such as well. So always read your player packs to find out what these are, because these might also be covered independently from the Code of Conduct. Then when it comes to stratagems and abilities, whenever a player uses a stratagem rule or an ability in the course of play, they must, if asked, present the written rule in its entirety to their opponents the first time that their opponent asks. You can't go, oh, just trust me, bro, I know the rules. No, you have to actually provide it to your opponent, because otherwise you could be misreading it, you could be misinterpreting it. They may have a different interpretation of how you interpret it. And so it's kind of that point of where if you provide the rules for them to read, it then gives them that opportunity to engage in that conversation with you and go, hey, I actually disagree with how you've interpreted in this situation because of X, Y, and Z. Do you mind if we get a judge over to come and officiate this conversation? Then it's going to be a lot easier for them to actually handle. You've got a judge there who can make a call, yes or no, because you're both disagreeing and you've got a disagreement. You know, it's a really good point to have. Then we come to player decorum. Now, this is a big one for me personally. I've been very specific in my Gong Hammers players pack for this, where, you know, players can never take an action that will put the hobby of Warhammer in disrepute. So basically anything that's considered disrespectful towards other players, tournament organizers, judges, venue staff, other volunteers, etc. Some TOs will consider all of that. Some TOs may only consider some of that. Again, a player cannot be abusive or mocking of others or disrespectful, and anyone that uses such language, you know, that's derogatory or vulgar in nature, you know, they've got here, will be considered having committed a foul, issued a yellow or red card, an appropriate penalty down to the judges. Any physical altercation at all is an immediate red card and removal from the event, and will be denied any rankings points for FLG events for a period of time, and it is at the discretion of the FLG guys, which I think is great. Anyone who does anything physically should just be immediately ejected. Like, red card, 0 points, contact ITC, contact other rankings, and just go, just get out. In my personal opinion, being physically threatening is unacceptable. A player can never purposefully destroy property, whether that is their own or others, at an event, and it is also an immediate red card. A player may never purposefully deceive another player by malicious misinformation, incomplete information, or vague stated information. Effectively, if you've got to be clear with your communication with your opponent and to other TOs and such as well. And if there is a pattern of accidental deception or misinformation, it can also be used to be considered for a yellow or red card based on the judge's discretion if that pattern has occurred throughout the tournament. It's also something to note that this is something that judges can also utilize across multiple events. So if you've got a circuit of TOs that talk with each other, and that is the only circuit you can play at events in your local area, if you commit fouls at multiple events, those TOs are probably talking and they're going to be aware of what's going on, just in a general sense. Now, players can't model for advantage. Most tournaments have got modeling requirements and restrictions in their players packs already, so that is going to be another one for you guys, but just don't snipe around it. If you do, there's penalties in place for that. Now, rules angle shooting with interpretations is defined as the act of various underhanded, unfair methods taking advantage from inexperienced opponents, meaning that you're taking advantage of someone not understanding the rules that you are using or that you have available to you for units or army rules or faction rules or stratagems by doing so. And again, it is a serious break of player decorum, resulting in a yellow card and a 10 victory point penalty minimum they suggest here. Now, that can be increased depending on the egregiousness of it as well. Now, it does talk about player tardiness, spectators, how spectators can't actually give advice to any players and help them in the game, consistent slow play, so making sure you're playing your games in a reasonable pace to get through them to a natural conclusion is always encouraged. And you know, it's always best as a TO to find a pattern. If someone is consistently only getting to turn 3 of their games, that then a penalty is put in place from the first game that they did have that slow play experience. And then, you know, as players, you should always be accepting any TO decision or any judge decision as the authority of the event and as final, that it's not up for discussion. Whilst yes, you can respectfully communicate and defend your position, once the judge has made their call, it's binding. So any person disregarding a judge's ruling or debate with a judge because they disagree in a verbally abusive or disrespectful manner is again considered a foul and a red card by FLG standards. And basically any other unsportsmanlike behavior is what they cover here as well. You've got your tools, which are dice, so making sure that there's nothing that's altered, you know, cooked dice, rigged dice, all that kind of stuff. You're making sure they're nice and clear so your opponent can read them. Make sure you're rolling in the open and making sure your opponent is able to actually see what you're doing and not taking advantage of any instances where they might not be paying attention, scooping up your dice, then quickly rolling through. And so then you're, you know, so they're able to see as well for what you're doing rather than just going off what you're saying. Whilst yes, you might be saying what is correct, they haven't seen it to corroborate that that is actually what you have rolled successfully for hit wounds, saves, all that kind of stuff. It's always best to roll in the open so your opponents can see what you are doing there. And then making sure you're measuring correctly. Dice apps as well is another niche one. A lot of players don't use them, but they need to be cleared ahead of time by the TOs and such. And then, you know, chess clocks being used, and they must be accurate and easily accessible by both players in an equal capacity, rather than being on one side of the table and such as well. And whilst it is encouraged by frontline gaming, if you want to use a chess clock, you can. Using it and weaponizing it against someone else is something that is also against player decorum and is considered, you know, a red card, and the offending player may actually be disqualified as well. Now, there's a whole section around how you can call for a judge. Each player has the ability and is entitled to call over a judge to officiate any discussion. And I think the biggest thing I can say to this is don't be afraid as a player to call a judge. It is always better to get a judge over to discuss something rather than to assume everything is fine and that you don't need a judge to resolve this rules dispute. No, it's always better to get a judge, because then you've got an impartial third party that is making an adjudication. So then it, you know, it stops you having any negative feelings towards your opponent or any issues there. And that's why judges, in my personal opinion, if you're running a tournament and it's if it's above say 24 players or it's a GT sized event, then you shouldn't be playing as a TO. You should actually be just there to adjudicate and run the tournament. You shouldn't have player judges, you shouldn't have player TOs unless it is just in the capacity of organizing the event they are helping out with. And then when it comes to the actual day, there are dedicated TOs helping with that. So that is kind of my personal stance on that. And I've been very vehement over the years around that specific issue, because it does blur the lines between tournament organizer and player then, and it brings any calls that you make as a TO and any judge calls made on your game into disrepute and into question, because it can be considered to be having a biased stance, because it could affect a player that you might end up playing in the next round or heading up to the winner brackets of the event and getting prize support and such as well. It's just really murky, and I really disagree with it. Now, there's a lot of stuff there when it comes to how judges can interact with you and what you can do if a judge has been abusive and such as well, which I encourage you go and read. In terms of penalties, we all know that there's red cards and yellow cards. Now, yellow cards are given for fouls that are non-disqualifying offenses, whether that is, you know, mistakenly using rules or incorrect characteristics. Now, at an event, a player can only accrue 1 yellow card. If they receive a second yellow card, then it becomes a red card, and an appropriate penalty will be applied for receiving a red card. So this is kind of the standard that a lot of events have, where if you get a yellow card, that is binding for the rest of the event. If you get a second yellow card, it is then a red card. Basically like soccer in that sense, or football for those over in the UK and Europe who don't like the fact that Australians and Americans call football soccer. So that is basically how it works. And then if you get a red card, generally if you are given a red card without a yellow card, it's for a disqualifying offense. And it could also be from multiple yellow cards being given. If a player does receive one or more red cards, FLG have got it that you will be ejected from a tournament and removed from future events at the organizer's sole discretion. So bear that in mind in terms of how you accrue cards. Now, when you are dishing out penalties, they've got a list here of recommended victory point penalties to be applied for various yellow card offenses, and then also red card offenses as well. Could be you just receive 0 points for the game, your opponent gets the bias score unless the opponent's card score would be higher. There is also event disqualification as well, open to you as a TO to be able to utilize. And then it also talks about bans, whether that's 3, 6, 8, or 12-month bans. It could also be 9 months, for example. But it's especially there to be used for egregious and repeated fouls and or behaviors from a player, and it can be requested from FLG. Now, this can be something that, you know, say for example, you're running ITC events. Maybe you reach out to the ITC team and go, hey, I've had this player who has consistently been doing this. I need them to be dealt with, where they're going to be getting their points removed from this event. They received a yellow card with a tournament ejection. They were removed from the event, so they're not going to receive any points from the tournament for the ITC. I would like you guys to go through and do that, and then also they're going to be banned from our events, and we would like to have them banned from the ITC for a set period of time. Of course, Frontline Gaming is separate from ITC now, but that would be something that you could do as a TO, is to reach out and have that voided. There is a whole heap of stuff around teams and clubs as well. So not just individual player conduct is addressed in the Code of Conduct, it's also individual teams. So groups of players together, whether, you know, as a cohesive team, you're misbehaving, you're having poor player decorum, there are penalties and stuff there. And so it'll be actually given to the entire team as well. So if you are a part of a team, bear that in mind. Keep in mind that if you attend an event and there is this kind of code of conduct, that your entire team may get labeled, you know, as being a problematic team that's being watched, or they might have a yellow status for their team, or your team might even get banned because of any misconduct that your team has had overall. Now, we have got the outline for the Frontline Gaming chess clock rules here, which I won't go through, but it gives you a lot of information around things like how to use the clock, what to do when you're running low on your clock, things like that as well. Then we've got the index of terms, so such as spirit of the game, you've got slow play, standard game, championship rounds, championship game, etc., modeling for advantage and all that. And then we've got the list of contributors. So we've got Reese Robbins, John Waymeyer, Adam Solis, Chris Morgan, Daniel Ruiz, Travis Simpson, Matt Root, Thomas Heshimoki, Jason Horn, Franking G and Papa, Neil Kerr, and the Tournament Organiser's Facebook group. This was written and probably just recently adjusted as well. But these guys are the ones that came up with this code of conduct, and I think it is a really solid code of conduct personally, and it's why I turn to it for my events and why I use it at my events as well, because it is a great metric to utilize, because these judges and these tournament organizers run events that are 4 to 5 times the size of any tournament that we see here in Australia outside of Adelaide Uprising, but even then LVO is 5 times the capacity of Adelaide Uprising as well. So that is something else to bear in mind, that they run large events with large judging teams, and so having this in place makes complete and utter sense, and that's why I look to them personally. Now, I think a lot of things in the player conduct written by Frontline Gaming are super important, because they outline how you as a player should be conducting yourself and what penalties there are if you don't. If you step your foot in the mud and you know, make multiple mistakes, or you make a player conduct error, or you misplay something, then of course a judge may use their discretion and go, look, I'm just going to give you a warning, but you're on our list and we're going to keep an eye on you. We're not going to apply a card in this situation, and, you know, say it happens again, the same thing, then that's when it gets to cards. Or it might be egregious enough and game changing enough that where they go, no, we're just going to apply a card straight away. We're not going to wait. And so I think it's important for us as TOs, for all of our events, to have a code of conduct in place for not just players, but also teams, how chess clocks are used, what, you know, those definitions are. And that's why for Warhammer, we are using the Frontline Gaming Code of Conduct, because it's super important to have that clear expectation for players that are attending the event. And it's something that a lot of TOs are able to look to from a large organization that puts on a lot of events and have a large sized in terms of player number events, and use that when creating their own player conduct and team conduct expectations, chess clock rules and stuff, so that it is coming from a third-party source. They're referencing that and go, hey, this has been inspired by the Frontline Gaming Code of Conduct, for example. So I think it's great, and it's definitely something that, at least as a player, for you to be aware of as well when it comes to how you want to interact with your opponent, what play decorum items you should really focus on having, and what the penalties are if you do, you know, make mistakes, when you do slip up and such as well. I think it's super important for TOs to have this discussion as TO teams, or have a stance personally as a TO to go, hey, this is the standard by which I'm doing things. This is the outlined penalties and such as well. So really great to reference something like this from some of the big guns in the tournament organization space. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, well, thank you so much for hanging out for today's video. I know it's a bit of an interesting one, talking about player conduct and, you know, what that looks like from both the player's perspective and a tournament organizer's perspective is super important, because I think as we continue to see the game grow larger and larger, and we see more streaming teams pop up across the globe with live streaming tournaments and such, where, you know, we had, I think there was like 11 different live stream partners over at the WTC. I think having things like this in place to properly adjudicate players and have clear penalties in place for misconduct, for mistaken rules, things like that, is super important, so that, you know, players are able to be aware. Because if they aren't aware and it's not transparently available to them, then, you know, it can get icky. So that's why I do like referring to the Frontline Gaming Code of Conduct personally. So then it is a clear document that I can point to. It's publicly accessible, and so players can have a look at that ahead of time as well. But if you did enjoy today's video, feel free to leave it with a like. If you have any feedback as well, or any thoughts as a player or as a TO, let me know down in the comment section below. I'd love to have that discussion with fellow TOs, not just here in Australia, but also across the globe as well, of what your stance is when it comes to player misconduct, how you do things, and some of the things that are written in the Frontline Gaming Code of Conduct, and what your thoughts are around it as well. And if you want to catch more content from us here at the ATWN, feel free to hit that subscribe button, turn on that notification bell, so you'll be notified as to when we are releasing more content here on the network. And also, if you do want to head over to Twitch, where you can catch us live a couple of times throughout every week, where we do hobbying sessions, tournament previews, and live tournament coverage over on Australia's TWN over there, which is our Twitch channel. And I also want to give a shout out to everyone who financially supports us here at the ATW. Without your guys' financial support, we wouldn't be able to do everything that we do as a network, and we're really making some great investments to upping our tournament coverage quality for next year and some of the events later on this year as well. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.